Before I continue, I want to accept that I neglected to introduce two assistants for Biff's program, Eric and Diana. Eric is here, Diana is back there. Okay, stand so people can see you. They're great. So now I have the pleasure of introducing Biff Mithoefer, who teaches yin yoga workshops and teacher training throughout the U.S. and internationally. He has studied shamanism with teachers of the Shipibo tradition of Eastern Peru. Is that the correct pronunciation, Biff? Shipibo, yeah. And is a student of cross-cultural shamanism as taught by Angela Arian. He's the author of the Yin Yoga Kit and co-author of the Therapeutic Yoga Kit. He's also the founder of the YAMSA Sponsorship Project for the support of Tibetan refugee children, and he lives with his family in Dorset, Vermont. He did tell us that he doesn't see himself as a yoga teacher, he sees himself as a storyteller. But it's great because storytelling on yoga. So this is what he will be doing tonight. So please join me in welcoming Biff Mithoefer. Excuse me?
Oh, well, okay, this is okay. Yeah. Well, now I've got the command. I'm going to sit here. I don't want to stand up. I don't want to be the one standing while you're all sitting, so I'm going to sit right here. So,
Do you want us to put a chair on the stage for you?
I don't care, whatever you like. I just don't like to be the one standing up while everyone's sitting down.
If you wanted to speak from the podium.
Oh, okay, well, that was, okay.
I'll be happy to bring a chair.
What do you think? Where do you like me? Oh, yeah, I'm with you. This is more fun. We'll go from here. Well, I want to say first that what a great pleasure to be back here after so long. And I will say my shirt has been hanging in my closet for 3 years, waiting for tonight. I was speaking to my granddaughter, Ozma, who turned 8 a little while ago, the other day, and she began to lament to me about some of her friends and how they were behaving. And she started talking about how they argued all the time and how they disagreed and how they always wanted to be in charge. And she said, they just don't understand it. This whole thing is like one big puzzle. And we all have to fit our pieces into the puzzle. And until we fit our pieces in, we can't see the whole picture. But she said, my friends all think that their piece should be in the middle of the puzzle and everyone else's piece should be around the outside. And they don't understand that until we all get our pieces in the puzzle, none of us can see the whole picture. And of course, I began to think about that. And as it had turned out previously, a little while before, I was asked to speak tonight. And when I thought about that, I immediately thought about a story, a very ancient story from Persia. But it's a very complex story with gender issues and role reversal issues and all this. And I'm thinking, why would I tell a story like that? But stories are funny. They're like old friends. Sometimes they come in the middle of the night and they knock on the door. They slip a note under the door because they've got something to tell you. But I couldn't think of why I would tell a story like this. But what Ozma said began to open it a little for me. And then I happened to be with two very close friends of mine, Sebastian and Joaquin. Sebastian is 8 years old and Joaquin is 6. And they happened to be visiting me with their parents. And so I told them the bad time story. So I told them this story that I'm going to tell you. And I'll share with you after the story the way they received it and the way I began to understand why I'm here to tell this story. And as I say, it's a very old and ancient story from Persia. And it goes something like this. Once upon a time, long, long ago, in a small village on the edge of a great prairie, a great desert, lived a husband and his wife. And they were both very stubborn, and they argued all the time, from morning till night. They argued. And as it was the way of the husband, he'd go in the morning and he'd sit out on his porch in the sun, smoking his pipe and relaxing, while his wife would be cleaning the floor and doing the dishes and washing the clothes. And they'd argue, and she'd say, "Husband, why are you such a bum? You sit around all day, you don't do anything, you don't help. You do nothing at all around here." "Nothing," he said. "Why, I'm having deep thoughts." "Yeah, as deep as a pig's tail is long," she said, and off they went arguing again. All day they argued. Well, after a while, the calf lowed in the barn, and they argued about that. She said, "It's your turn to feed the calf." "No," he said, "that's your work. You feed the calf. Besides, I'm busy having deep thoughts and smoking my pipe." And so on they went arguing until it was almost dusk. And then all of a sudden they had the same idea at the same time. And they both blurted out. They said, "Okay, the next one who speaks will feed the calf till the end of its days." And so they both shut up. And they went to bed as usual, and they got up in the morning, and the wife swept the floor, and she washed the clothes, and the husband sat on the porch in the sun, smoking his pipe and thinking deep thoughts. But the wife knew that if she stayed there, she'd get so annoyed she'd be sure to say something. So she decided she'd go visit a friend in the village, and she did. So she went to her friend's house. And the husband sat in the sun, smoking his pipe contentedly. Well, it happened about that time, along came a beggar. And he came to the husband and he held out his hand. He said, "Please, sir, could I have a crust of bread or something to eat, a drink of wine?" And the husband started to say, "Get away from here, leave me alone." But he thought, "Oh, wait a minute. That wife of mine is very clever. I'll bet she hired this man to come, pretend he's a beggar, so I'd say something and I'd have to feed the calf for the rest of its days." So he didn't say a word. He just sat there stubbornly. And the beggar asked again, "Please, sir, could I have something to eat?" And again, the husband sat there, stone-faced. And so the beggar thought, okay, and he went in the house. And he ate all the cheese and the bread. He drank the wine, ate all of it until he was so full he couldn't eat another bite. And he thanked the husband, and off he went. Well, the husband was still sitting there, furious, thinking, she's clever, but she's not too clever for me. Well, after a time, it just happened that along came a barber. The barber saw this man sitting on his porch, and he went up to him. He said, "Sir, would you like me to trim your beard and your hair?" And the husband started to say, "No, go away." But he thought, "Oh, wait a minute. She's hired him to try to get me to say something, so I'll have to feed the calf till the end of its days." So he didn't say a word. So the barber thought, okay, I guess he wants his trim. So he trimmed his beard nicely and cut his hair. And then he said, "Could you pay me, please?" The husband didn't say a word. He just sat there steaming mad. And he thought, no, I'm not going to be tricked. I'm not going to be tricked. And the barber got kind of mad. And he said, "You have to pay me. I did the work. You have to pay me." The husband didn't say a word. So the barber said, "Listen, if you don't pay me, I'm going to shave your beard off and I'm going to cut your hair in the style of a woman." And the husband didn't say a word. He said, "Oh, wait, no way. I'm too stubborn. I'm not going to be fooled by that." So the barber shaved his beard and he cut his hair in the style of a woman and left him sitting there on the porch. Well, the husband sat there smoking his pipe, angry. But along came an old woman. And she was hard of seeing, but her work was to help women with their makeup and perfume and things like that. But she couldn't see very well, so she looked and what is that woman sitting by herself on the porch? Oh, and she's not a very pretty woman either, she thought. And she went up to her husband. She said, madam, may I help you with your makeup or whatever? And the husband, nope, she's not going to get me. And he didn't say a word. So the old woman took out her lipstick and she put it on the husband, and she put some rouge on, and she put some ribbons in his hair and everything like that. And she thought, well, that's the best I can do. And she said, well, could you pay me for my work? And again, he sat there quietly, not saying a word. And so she reached in his pocket. She took out all his money. She said, okay, this is enough. And off she went. Well, there he sat again. Well, after time went by, it happened that a thief came, and he looked and he said, there's a woman sitting by herself on the porch, and that's a very strange thing. But strange things often present opportunities for a thief. So he went up to the woman and he said, madam, to the husband, woman, and he said, madam, what are you doing all by yourself, sitting alone on your porch? Don't you have anyone with you in the house? And the husband didn't say a word. And the thief thought, this is an opportunity. And he went in the house. And the husband still sat on the porch. And he took his big bag and he loaded in the gold cups and all the valuables and some rugs and things. And he slung the pack over his back. And off he went, waving at the husband as he went. And the husband sat there and saying, I know, when she gets back, I'm going to give her a piece of my mind because she's not going to fool me. Well, about that time, the calf got so hungry that it broke its rope and ran into the village. Well, the wife was sitting in the village and saw the calf run by, and so she caught it, and she thought, there must be trouble at home. So she went back to the house. And as she approached the house, she looked and she said, what is that strange woman sitting on the porch? And she said, I've been gone just half a day, and already you've taken a new wife? And the husband jumped up. He said, ha, I caught you. You spoke first. Now you're going to have to feed the calf from now on. And she looked at him and she said, you stubborn, foolish man. You cut off your beard and your hair just to win the bet, just to be right? She shook her head and she went in the house and she came back out and she said, where's all our valuables? Where's all our food? And he said, oh, you can't trick me. That thief you hired to come pretend to take our things, I know he'll bring it back. And you're going to have to feed the calf for the rest of the days. And she said, don't worry about that. I'll feed the calf because I'm leaving and I'm taking the calf with me. So she took the calf by the rope and off she went into the village. And she asked around, has anyone seen a thief with a big bag? And sure enough, some of the kids had seen him, and they said, oh, yes, way off in the desert. He's headed across the desert. So she hitched up her bale, and she took the calf by the rope, and she headed after the thief. Well, that night she caught up with him at the oasis. And they sat side by side at dinner, and they began to talk. And she didn't dissuade him. She batted her eyelashes a little bit, and she acted a little provocative. And pretty soon he became a bit enamored. And the next day, they continued their journey together. And throughout the day, he became more and more attached to her. And finally, he asked her to marry him. And she said, oh, certainly, I'd be happy to marry you in the next village. Well, it was almost dark, so she knew that it was too late for a wedding. But sure enough, they went to the chief's house, and they asked the chief to marry them. And he said, certainly, we'll have a ceremony in the morning. But meanwhile, feel free to stay in my house and sleep here. So they did. And they lay down, and the thief went to sleep, and the chief went to sleep. But the wife stayed awake. And late into the night, she crept up and she looked in the bag, and sure enough, it was all their valuables. So she began to leave, but then she had a thought. And she took some flour and some water, and she heated it over a candle. And she poured the mixture into the shoes of the thief, and then, for good measure, into the shoes of the chief as well. And then off she went across the desert. Well, the sun was just coming up, and the thief awoke, and he looked out, and he couldn't see the valuables. And sure enough, he looked, and way across in the desert was her escaping with the calf and all the valuables. Well, he grabbed his shoes and went to put them on. But, of course, the flour had all hardened like glue, and he couldn't get his feet in them. But then he grabbed the chief's shoes, and he couldn't get his feet in them either, of course. So he ran out in the desert after the woman. Well, the sun was beating down on the desert, and the desert floor was like a frying pan. Pretty soon his back began to burn his feet, and he had to turn around and leave. Well, the woman proceeded with the calf and finally made it back to her house. But she noticed when she got there that her husband wasn't sitting on the porch. And she went in the house, and the house was swept, and the soup was gently cooking on the stove. And she went in the backyard, and there he was hanging up the laundry. She said, "Husband, what are you doing?" And he said, "Oh, wife, I've been such a fool, such a stubborn fool. I've given away all our valuables and all our food. I've shaved my beard and made myself look like a woman just so I could be right and just so I could win the bet." And he said, "From now on, I'm going to share the chores with you, and we'll feed the calf, and I'll feed the calf." "No," she said, "we'll take turns feeding the calf." And from that day on, they did their chores together. They took turns feeding the calf. And at the end of the day, they sat together in the sun, holding hands and watching the world go by. The end. So I told this story to Sebastian and Joaquin. And as the story went on, Joaquin started to sit up in bed. He's 6, and he had his hands like his head on his elbow like that. And he's watching me very contentedly with his big, brown 6-year-old eyes. And when I finished, he said, "There's a lesson in that story, I think." I said, "Yo, what's the lesson for you, Joaquin?" And he said, "The lesson is don't argue." And then it struck me why I was telling the story. Because a story is something that gives you what you need when you need it. And you can feel what's in a person's heart and what's in their mind, what's in their life by what they find in the story, what part of it they take from the story, because that's how stories are. And what he took was this: don't argue. And of course, for a 6-year-old, argument means conflict. So what he was saying is what he took from this whole complex story was that simple thing: don't argue. And then I was away at the time, and I went home. And then I was speaking to my granddaughter, Osman, and about her friends, and I told her this story. And she was talking about how we need to fit in and we need to help each other to understand and to see the world. And I was so struck by this is the message of that the children are giving us in every way that they can do it. They're saying, stop this conflict. It's time to help each other put the pieces back in the puzzle. It's time to help each other see the whole picture. That's what the 6-year-olds are telling us. That's what the 8-year-olds are telling us. And they're telling us, and we're supposed to be in charge. So it's time for us to listen to the children. And that story reminds us, of course, that until we stop thinking that our piece is the most important, until we stop pushing people to the outside, until we begin to help each other understand the whole picture and put the pieces back in the puzzle, until that time happens, we're never going to be able to sit on the porch together in the sun, holding hands and watching the world go by. The end. Thank you.